thinking of gifts like tongues, I wouldn't know how to even do it. Do you just kind of wait for something to overtake you, like you're saying, just go bub 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 bub? Yeah, I think that's something.
Yeah.
Or do you have to try and speak, or does it happen? That's what I was always curious about that. So, what would you say?
I can tell you, here's the thing. We don't have biblical precedent for it being one way or the other. We just know that they did it. I mean, it does seem like it sort of happened to them rather than them participating in it early on. But yet you have a very explicit statement of Paul saying, don't do it, which means you have a choice. Don't do it without interpretation. In a public setting, obviously. He's talking about the formal gathering of the church, which I would consider a sacrament. I consider the gathering of the saints sacramental, that God is with us when we gather in a way that he's not with us when I'm hanging out with a bunch of Christians in Starbucks. And so there does seem to be some indicator that at least on the first go of it for some of these guys in Acts and that there was some sort of like overtaking almost, but that wasn't my experience. My experience was somebody prayed for me and they were like, hey, you've got to speak. And I was like, but what do I say? And they're like, I don't know. It doesn't come from your mind though. It comes from down here in like your gut. And so I just started speaking, and initially I thought it was just me making it up. I really did. And then I would forget what I said, and I would try it again, and maybe a month later, and the same words would come out. And so one of the other things I was encouraged to do was, hey, look, you may feel like it's gibberish. It doesn't always feel supernatural. But, you know, if you're just trying to worship God and you're just trying to do what you think is a godly thing to do, which is to appreciate a gift that he may have given you, just do it and trust that God will take over in the process. And believe it or not, that's what I did. I just kept doing it. And the language eventually took on a life of its own. And today, I've had a number of times where people have understood me speaking in fluent Portuguese. I've had people understand me speaking Italian. It's definitely it's clearly a Romance language of some sort, but I don't know what it is.
Yeah, wow.
And it's not just one of those languages, because I've had people understand me in different languages, or I've had people who know Spanish fluently go, well, you said this word, which sounds a lot like this word in Spanish.
Yeah.
And so then they've told me some things that they thought I've said.
Maybe a historical
I've had a number
branch.
of other, I don't know. And so that's been my experience. And I can't tell you how many times. At the most recent Remnant Radio conference we did down in Oklahoma City, I did a workshop on tongues and interpretation. Now, I tell people I can't teach you to operate in a gift that you don't have. To be clear, God gives the gifts. I can teach you how the gift seems to work in Scripture and my own experience of it. And that is often very helpful for people when it comes to understanding whether or not they have that gift or not. And one of the other ways you find out if what you're doing is actually tongues is when somebody understands you. I always find it funny that people say, well, don't speak in tongues unless there's an interpreter in every setting. And I'm like, no, this is the gathering of the saints that Paul's concerned about. He's concerned about unbelievers or people uninformed about gifts being in the meeting and thinking you're crazy.
So a home
which is
group
what happens in some of these. Yeah. Well, in an environment where it's a bunch of people who understand what the gift is, I'm less concerned about that. And I think Paul was less concerned about that. But also, how is anyone going to know that they have a gift of interpretation unless someone speaks in a tongue?
Yeah, that's a good point.
So you've got to have some place for that to happen. Mm-hmm. And so that's been my experience. I've seen a number of people get the gift of interpretation when I've felt inclined to speak in front of an audience. And that happened at the most recent Remnant Radio conference that we did in October. I don't know, 5 or 6 people understand a good portion of what I said.
Wow.
And some of them got very similar interpretations.
Okay.
Which was very confirming for even those who have the gift of interpretation, that they also would doubt if it's real. Right. They would hear you speaking in tongues, and they would hear something in English right next to it. Or they would know a good bit of the language itself and said, you just said this word, and here's what it means. They just understood on some level. So that was quite the experience for them. But I'd seen that happen a number of times.